Withdraw from Iraq. Welcome to New Jersey Now. I'm Harry Martin. It's been the source of heated debate between Capitol Hill and the White House. But after recommendations by General David Petraeus to pull as many as 30,000 troops out by next summer, President Bush addressed the nation and endorsed his top generals in Iraq. Here's Doug Luzader with more.
The president calls his new Iraq strategy return on success. Because the troop surge has shown some military progress, he says, it's time to make some adjustments.
Our success in meeting these objectives now allows us to begin bringing some of our troops home.
And it will start soon, with more than 5,000 troops leaving Iraq this year, eventually approaching pre-surge levels next summer. Largely the same plan that General David Petraeus outlined this week before Congress.
The way forward I've described tonight makes it possible, for the first time in years, for people who have been on opposite sides of this difficult debate to come together.
But that is unlikely. In a response last night, Democrats argued for deeper troop cuts and promised to fight the new White House plan.
Do we continue to heed the president's call that all Iraq needs is more time, more money, and the indefinite presence of 130,000 American troops, the same number as 9 months ago? Or do we follow what is in our nation's best interest and redefine our mission in Iraq?
The president's mission, meantime, includes prodding the Iraqi government toward reconciliation and supporting it for perhaps years to come.
Their success will require U.S. political, economic, and security engagement that extends beyond my presidency.
Joining us right now to talk more about this is Representative Scott Garrett of New Jersey's 5th Congressional District. Thank you very much for joining us. How do you think the president did the other night?
Well, I think he did admirably in the presentation. It's obviously an extremely difficult challenge for anyone to make the case to the American public in light of, A, the difficulties that are going on in Iraq as we speak, and also the debate at home, which gets up to, well, we saw what MoveOn.org did in the New York Times, a aggravated debate at best.
What do you think about that? What do you think about the Times?
I think it's, well, I think
you're referring to the General betray us,
exactly.
As General Petraeus.
Exactly. I think the ad was disgusting, and I think it's very telling, unfortunately, that the members of the Democrat Party have not come out and condemned that ad as Republicans had. When you think that we're in a time of war, and our general in the theater with the boots on the ground is being called a traitor, how is our enemies going to be looking at us, and how are they going to be using that to their advantages? I cannot believe that both parties, Republicans and Democrats, didn't come together and say, that's terrible, we condemn it, but the Democrats have been silent, unfortunately.
You've been calling for a bipartisan plan to try to stabilize Iraq. How do you do that? How do you get a bipartisan plan to stabilize Iraq, or any plan for that matter?
Well, I did that because I believe that's what the American public is looking for. Whether you're talking about monumental issues such as the war in Iraq or other issues that we have to deal with, education or health care, what have you, I think the American public is dissatisfied with what Washington has produced, and that's a partisan reality. And so we were able to get 6 Republicans and a half a dozen Democrats together on a letter and say, let's send a letter to our leadership, both Republican and Democrats, and say that we need to put the rhetoric aside, we need to put these once-a-week votes on Iraq aside, we need to put things like MoveOn.org and that sort of thing aside, and sit down to debate it evenly and honestly.
And what do you come up with? I mean, I think, is the time for debate not over? Isn't that the time for a plan?
Well, yeah, and that's what the letter calls for as well. The letter says at the end of the day, we want to do that. We want to have a plan that we can work together with so that our troops are not left hanging out there. You know, Peter King was just on the radio the other day, and he said he just came back from Iraq after the letter in the New York Times was published and what have you, and he said that the troops on the ground are outraged as well, to say that not necessarily at the Democrats, they didn't know that they were being silent on it, but that anyone would be putting those positions out to saying that their general, our general, the general that they're leading them into battle, so to speak, is being called a traitor. So those things are difficult, but I'm still ever hopeful that we can extend a hand across the aisle and say, let's work together to come up with that plan post-surge.
Right, but is it not possible to disagree with a plan and to speak out like MoveOn.org did, and I'm not saying that I necessarily agreed with what they said or the way they say it, is it not possible to do that and still support the troops?
Oh, sure. You can disagree and but not be disagreeable.
Mm-hmm.
You can disagree and not call our general who's leading the troops a traitor. And we do that. Matter of fact, I disagree with some of the things the president does as well.
Okay, that's my question to you. Why has the rhetoric been so heated the way it is? I mean, it's been heated before, but now it's just, I mean, it is really backbiting. It's almost nasty.
It gets to a larger issue than just the war. The fact of the matter is that in the House right now, we're going to election year next year. In the House, we're up by a difference of 15 votes. Senate, of course, is very close as well. And the Democrats are in charge, and they're looking at it and say they have to do everything they can to stay in power. And how it turns on to the war is this very quickly. The Democrat majority leader said several weeks ago, if we win in Iraq, that is bad for the Democrat Party. So when you're using that sort of rhetoric or taking that position that politics trumps everything else, you're going to have that heated rhetoric.
And where did that change? Because I'm often reminded of what it was like with President Reagan and Tip O'Neill, for example. I mean, they essentially were great friends, you know, as soon as after 5 o'clock, you know, during cocktail hour, if you will. But they could debate, and they could really have huge differences of opinion. But, I mean, legend has it that they really, really liked each other as human beings.
I think they did. We do have to recall that even though during the Reagan administration, it's after the fact now, we all think that everybody was happy and getting along back in the Reagan administration. But remember what some from the other side were saying about him as far as his intellect, his age, and whether or not he was really running the show back then as well. So there were those charges from the other side against Reagan. Now that he unfortunately has passed away, everybody thinks about him in a positive manner, and we sort of forget about
you always look back with rose-colored glasses.
Exactly.
That's the truth.
Exactly.
President Bush's popularity, his approval rating right now is something like 54% according to our latest poll. It's really not doing. His disapproval rating,
his disapproval is 50. I was hopeful for a minute that maybe you had a new poll that showed his approval rating was gone.
No, I'm afraid not. And do you want him to campaign for you?
As of right now, we have not asked the president to come in. I think that he has his hands full with the problems in Iraq and other ones as well.
Do you see him as a positive force when you're trying to get reelected?
I don't think most Republicans are probably going to ask him to take his time away from the conflicts and the difficulties he has to deal with because it's just not the time to be doing that, I guess.
That was very tactful of you. Are you going to ask him to come to New Jersey to help your campaign?
As we were just discussing beforehand, before we went on the air, you know, the election actually for myself is next year.
Yes.
And so my focus really is on what's going on in Washington and not so much on the election.
Okay. Before we go, I do want to ask you about one of the bills that you introduced, and this is something you've been working on in relation to No Child Left Behind. You've introduced a bill called the LEARN Act. What's the LEARN Act all about? What's it going to do?
The LEARN Act is all about NCLB, No Child Left Behind, which is going to come up for reauthorization. And everywhere I've heard from teachers, parents, school administrators, they all do not like it. I do not like it, even though it's Republican President Bush's, maybe his legacy. I'm opposed to it. And what I simply say is this. If states want to, they should be given the right to opt out of all the red tape and regulations that NCLB has foisted on them and let them stay out of the system, let the parents, the local communities run their show, run the schools, and not have bureaucrats down in Washington telling them how they do it.
So you're for more local control?
Totally.
Basically, it would put everything back in the hands of the school boards?
Back in the school boards, back the way it used to be, back the way when you were all growing up. If you had a complaint, you had a concern with your school, you talk to your teacher, you go see the principal, you go maybe to the local school board chairman or what have you and deal with it, and they would have the power to resolve and deal with those issues. They would also be held accountable as well. They couldn't point the finger and say, I'm sorry, I'm doing this because Washington is telling me. Likewise, they wouldn't be red tape as well.
What would that do, though, to making sure that educational systems across the country are equal?
Well, actually, what it would do is lift up the educational systems, because right now NCLB has caused, despite what it was intended to do, has caused a race to the bottom. In order to meet the standards, in order to get the money out of Washington, what do the schools do? They'll say, okay, I'll tell you what, let's take the bar from here, where the parents may want it, we'll lower the bar down to here, so now we can say we passed it. We passed all the tests. Because under NCLB, the states set the bar, so they're setting it lower and lower and lower. They're passing it now. parents are thinking that, hey, our schools must be good because they're getting all the money from Washington. That's ridiculous.
Congressman Garrett, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure talking to you this morning. Coming up next, even with the president's plan to reduce troops in Iraq, the debate continues between Democrats and Republicans. We're going to be hearing from both sides when New Jersey Now continues, so do stay with us.